The night everything collapsed started like any other exhausting shift. In Nairobi, Kenya, 28-year-old Dr. Amina Okoye walked out of the emergency room after 12 brutal hours of non-stop patients, alarms and life-or-death decisions. Her body felt heavy with exhaustion, but one thought kept her going: her father. In just 2 weeks, Chinedu Okoye was supposed to have a critical heart surgery. Without it, the doctors had warned, he might not survive the year. 4 months, Amina had been working extra shifts, skipping weekends and barely sleeping, all to save enough money for the operation. Every paycheck went straight into a special hospital fund account. She hadn't bought new clothes in months, barely ate outside, and sometimes slept in the hospital's break room just to save time. But to her, none of that mattered. Saving her father was worth everything. As she stepped outside the hospital into the cool Nairobi night, she finally allowed herself a small moment of relief. She pulled out her phone and opened the banking app, planning to check the balance one more time before heading home. The screen loaded. Amina blinked once, then again. The number on the screen didn't make sense. The account balance was 0. Her heart began pounding in her chest. She refreshed the app 3 times, hoping it was a glitch. But the transaction history appeared clearly. Every dollar she had saved was gone. Within minutes she was in a taxi racing home, her mind spinning with fear and confusion. When she burst through the front door, her mother and younger sister were sitting in the living room. "Amina, why are you shouting?" her mother asked. Amina held up her phone, her voice shaking. "Who took the surgery money?" Lola barely looked up from her drink. She leaned back on the couch and shrugged like it was nothing. Then she smirked. "Relax," she said casually. "I needed it for my healing trip to Zanzibar." For a moment the room went completely silent, and Amina felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Amina had always been the one everyone depended on. Even as a child growing up in Lagos, Nigeria, she understood that life in her family was not easy. Money was often tight and her parents worked hard just to keep food on the table. While other kids spent their afternoons playing outside, Amina often sat at the small wooden table in their living room studying for hours. She knew education was her only way forward, and she was determined not to waste the sacrifices her father was making for her. Her father, Chinedu Okoye, believed deeply in her dreams. When Amina was accepted into medical school, he sold a small piece of family land and took extra work just to help pay for her tuition. He never complained, even when it meant long days and sleepless nights. "One day you'll save lives," he always told her proudly. "That will be worth more than anything." Those words stayed with Amina for years. She pushed herself through medical school, through endless exams, sleepless nights and exhausting hospital rotations. When she finally became a doctor, her father was the proudest man in the room. But life had its own cruel twist. Not long after Amina started working at the hospital in Nairobi, her father's health began to decline. The doctors diagnosed him with a serious heart condition that required expensive surgery. Without it, his life would be in danger. The moment Amina heard the diagnosis, she made a silent promise to herself. She would do whatever it took to save him. So she worked harder than ever. Extra shifts, overnight emergencies, weekends that never felt like weekends. Every bit of money she earned went into the surgery fund. Meanwhile, her younger sister Lola lived a completely different life. Lola had never carried the same responsibilities. She moved from one interest to another. One month it was art classes, the next it was meditation retreats, then yoga workshops or spiritual journeys. None of them lasted very long, but somehow the family always ended up paying for them. Whenever Amina questioned it, their mother, Ngozi Okoye, immediately stepped in to defend Lola. "She's still figuring herself out," her mother would say calmly. "Not everyone finds their path as quickly as you did." But to Amina it always felt unfair. While she was carrying the weight of the entire family on her shoulders, Lola seemed free to live without consequences. Still, Amina never complained much. She believed family meant responsibility. She believed sacrifice was sometimes necessary. What she never imagined was that the very people she was sacrificing for would one day betray her in the worst possible way. Amina stood in the middle of the living room, her phone still shaking in her hand. Her heart was beating so fast it almost hurt. She looked from her mother to her sister, hoping someone would say it was a mistake, that the bank had made an error, that the money would suddenly appear again. But no one looked surprised. "Who took the surgery money?" Amina asked again, her voice louder this time. Lola finally sighed like the question was annoying. She slowly put her drink down on the table and looked at Amina with a calm, almost bored expression. "I did," she said. For a moment Amina thought she had heard wrong. What? Lola leaned back on the couch and crossed her arms. Relax, Amina. It's not that serious. Not that serious? Amina's voice cracked. That money was for Dad's surgery. Lola rolled her eyes slightly. I know what the money was for. But I needed it. Amina stared at her, completely confused. Needed it for what? For my healing trip, Lola replied casually. I'm going to Zanzibar next week. It's a luxury wellness retreat. Meditation, therapy sessions, beach yoga. The whole program. I've been feeling really overwhelmed lately. For a second, Amina couldn't even speak. Her mind struggled to process the words she had just heard. Spent Dad's surgery money on a vacation? She finally whispered. It's not a vacation, Lola said defensively. It's emotional healing. Amina looked toward their mother, expecting her to be furious. Instead, Ngozi Okoye calmly folded her arms and spoke in a soft but firm voice. Amina, you're overreacting, she said. Your sister has been struggling mentally for months. Her emotional health matters too. Amina blinked in disbelief. Mom, Dad needs heart surgery. And Lola needs peace, her mother replied. Mental health is just as important. The words hit Amina like a slap. Her father's life-saving surgery, months of exhausting work, every overnight shift she had taken, every dollar she had carefully saved, all of it was gone. Spent on spa treatments, meditation classes and yoga sessions on a beach. Amina stood there in complete silence, feeling like the room was spinning around her. In that moment, a painful realization slowly sank in. Her father's life had just been traded for someone else's healing journey. That night Amina barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, the same thought came back to her mind. Her father's surgery was only 2 weeks away, and the entire fund she had worked so hard to build was gone. Months of sacrifice had disappeared in a single careless decision. But no matter how angry or hurt she felt, one thing was clear. She could not give up. Her father's life depended on that surgery. The next morning Amina woke up before sunrise and went straight back to the hospital. From that day forward, her life became a non-stop race against time. She began taking every extra shift the hospital offered. Day shifts, night shifts, emergency calls, she accepted all of them. Some days she worked nearly 20 hours with only a few minutes to sit down. The nurses started noticing the dark circles under her eyes, but Amina kept pushing herself. Every break she had was spent on her phone or laptop searching for help. She called banks asking about emergency medical loans. She contacted charities that supported heart patients. She emailed medical foundations, explaining her father's situation and begging for any kind of financial support. Sometimes she even stayed after her shift ended, sitting alone in the quiet hospital hallway while filling out long application forms. Most of the answers she received were slow or uncertain. Your request is under review. We will get back to you in several weeks. Unfortunately, our funding is limited. But Amina didn't have weeks. Every evening when she visited her father, she could see the changes in him. Chinedu Okoye tried to smile whenever she entered the room, but his breathing had become heavier. Sometimes he had to stop in the middle of a sentence just to catch his breath. The strong man who once worked long hours to support his family now struggled to walk across the room. Still he tried to comfort her. Don't worry about me too much, my daughter, he would say gently. But Amina knew the truth. The doctors had already explained how serious his condition was. Without surgery, his heart could fail at any moment, and every day that passed brought them closer to that dangerous deadline. As Amina walked through the hospital corridors late at night after another exhausting shift, one thought kept repeating in her mind. She had lost everything she saved, and now she had to somehow rebuild it, before time ran out. A few days later, after another exhausting shift at the hospital, Amina returned home feeling completely drained. Her body ached from lack of sleep, and her mind felt heavy from constant worry. She had spent the entire day calling organizations and filling out financial aid forms, but nothing had worked yet. The surgery date was getting closer and she still didn't know how she would pay for it. That evening she decided to visit her father's room to organize some of his documents. Chinedu had always been the kind of man who kept every important paper carefully stored in old folders and envelopes. Amina thought maybe she could find insurance papers, medical records, or anything that might help her understand their options better. She sat down at the small desk in his room and opened the first drawer. Inside were stacks of old documents, bank statements, tax papers, and receipts from many years ago. At first, nothing looked useful. Most of the papers were outdated. But then one folder caught her attention. It was old and slightly faded, with a label written in her father's neat handwriting. Curious, Amina opened it and began flipping through the pages. Inside were several legal documents and letters connected to something she had never heard about before. It mentioned a small medical technology company based in Accra, Ghana. Amina frowned in confusion as she kept reading. According to the documents, years ago, almost a decade earlier, her father had invested a small amount of money into this startup company. At the time, it looked like a risky and almost insignificant investment. The company had only a few employees and was still trying to develop its first medical device. Amina remembered how careful her father usually was with money. The idea that he had invested in a startup surprised her. Why would Dad do this? She murmured quietly to herself. She continued reading through the paperwork. There were share certificates, signed agreements, and a few letters from the company thanking him for supporting their early research. Then she noticed something that made her sit up straighter. One of the most recent documents mentioned that the company had experienced massive growth in recent years. Their medical technology had become successful in several African hospitals and was expanding internationally. Amina's heart began beating faster. The company had really grown that much. What did that mean for her father's old investment? For the first time in days, a small spark of hope appeared in her mind. Maybe, just maybe, her father had left behind a secret that could change everything. The next morning Amina woke up feeling a little different. For the first time in many days she had a small piece of hope in her mind. The documents she found in her father's drawer kept replaying in her thoughts. She still didn't fully understand them, but the idea that her father once invested in a medical startup made her curious. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe the company had failed years ago. Still, she decided that after her hospital shift, she would try to contact someone connected to the company in Accra. But before she even had the chance to start searching, something unexpected happened. Around midday, while Amina was walking through the hospital corridor between patients, her phone began to ring. She almost ignored it because she was so busy, but the number looked unfamiliar and international. After a moment of hesitation, she answered. "Hello, this is Dr. Amina Okoye speaking." A calm, professional voice replied from the other side. "Good afternoon, Dr. Okoye. My name is Kwame Adusei. I'm a corporate lawyer calling from Accra, Ghana." Amina stopped walking. "I'm calling regarding an early investment made by your father, Mr. Chinedu Okoye, in a medical technology company called Meditech Solutions." For a moment Amina felt her heart skip a beat. That was exactly the company mentioned in the documents she had found. "Yes, I actually found some papers about that yesterday," she said slowly. The lawyer sounded pleased. "Excellent. Then you may already know that your father purchased a small number of shares in the company about 10 years ago when it was still a startup." Amina nodded even though he couldn't see her. "Well," the lawyer continued, "I'm calling because there has been a major development. Yesterday the company was officially acquired by a large multinational healthcare corporation." Amina felt confused. "I'm sorry, what does that mean for my father?" There was a brief pause before the lawyer answered. "It means his early investment has increased in value significantly. In fact, after the acquisition was finalized, your father's shares are now worth several $1,000,000. For a second the hospital hallway felt completely silent. Amina leaned against the wall trying to process what she had just heard. "Several million?" she repeated quietly. "Yes," Kwame said calmly. "Your father believed in the company when very few people did. That decision turned out to be extremely valuable." Amina closed her eyes for a moment, her heart racing. Just days ago she had been desperately searching for money to save her father's life. And now, everything might have just changed. The news about the investment spread through the family faster than Amina expected. At first she had only planned to tell her father quietly, hoping it would give him peace of mind before the surgery. But in a house where everyone listened to every conversation, it didn't take long before the information reached everyone. By that evening Lola had heard about it. At first she didn't believe it. She walked into the living room where Amina was sitting with some paperwork from the lawyer and asked in a confused voice, "Wait, what are Mom and Dad talking about? Something about millions." Amina looked up at her calmly. She was too exhausted to argue anymore. Dad invested in a medical startup years ago, she said. The company was just bought by a big healthcare corporation. His shares are now worth millions. For a moment Lola just stared at her. The confident, careless expression she usually wore slowly disappeared from her face. Her mind quickly started connecting the dots. Just a few days earlier she had taken the entire surgery fund without hesitation, believing that was the only money the family had. But now everything looked different. Her stomach twisted as a terrible thought entered her mind. What if Amina had never found those documents, she thought. Her father might have missed the surgery completely. And it would have been her fault. For the first time since the whole situation started, the reality of her actions truly hit her. The trip to Zanzibar that once felt exciting suddenly seemed meaningless. She remembered the moment she casually told Amina, "Relax, I needed it for my healing trip." At the time it had felt like a small family argument. Now it felt like something much worse. Lola sat down quietly on the couch, her hands tightly clasped together. The room felt heavier than usual. Even their mother, who had defended her before, looked uncomfortable and avoided eye contact. Lola glanced toward Amina, who was still reviewing documents for their father's surgery. For the first time, Lola didn't feel defensive. She felt ashamed. She realized something she had never truly understood before. Actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences can hurt the people you love the most. And deep down she began to fear that the damage she had caused might not be something a simple apology could fix. Even after everything that had happened, the betrayal, the stolen money, and the weeks of sleepless nights, Amina refused to let anger take over. Her father's life was the most important thing. She knew that dwelling on revenge wouldn't save him, and she didn't have time to waste on resentment. Every ounce of her energy went into making sure he would get the best care possible. With the news of her father's investment turning into millions, Amina finally had the resources she needed. She immediately got to work. She called the top cardiac surgeons in Nairobi, asking about availability and expertise. She arranged for the latest medical equipment to be ready for the operation. Nothing was too expensive, nothing too small. Every detail mattered. She spent hours going over every report, every note from the doctors, making sure nothing was left to chance. Even at the hospital, her determination stood out. Nurses noticed how she moved from one room to another, handling patient emergencies while also managing her father's complex medical plan. Junior doctors watched in awe as she calmly coordinated with surgeons, lab technicians, and hospital administrators. It wasn't just her medical knowledge, they could see her heart. They could see that she was carrying the emotional weight of her entire family on her shoulders, and she did it with courage and grace. Lola too was quietly observing. For the first time she saw her sister not just as a sibling but as a force of nature. The sister who had silently sacrificed years of her life, who had worked countless nights, and who had borne the burden of responsibility without complaint. Amina didn't yell or argue, she didn't seek punishment. She simply acted. Every phone call she made, every decision she took, was focused on saving her father. Even Chinedu noticed it. Though weak from his heart condition, he could see the determination in her eyes. She was a daughter who refused to give up, no matter how impossible the situation seemed. And slowly he felt a quiet reassurance wash over him, knowing that his life was in the hands of someone who loved him more than anything else. In the chaos of betrayal and desperation, Amina's strength shone brighter than ever. Her focus, her selflessness, and her unwavering commitment didn't just secure her father's surgery. They reminded everyone around her of what true courage and love look like. The day of the surgery arrived, and Amina felt every ounce of exhaustion weighing her down. Weeks of non-stop work, sleepless nights, and constant stress had left her body drained and her mind frayed, but she forced herself to stand tall outside the operating room. Her father, Chinedu, had been admitted early that morning, and now everything rested on the surgeons and the careful planning she had arranged. Every detail of this day had been thought through, every decision made with love and urgency. The hospital hallway was quiet, but the tension in the air was almost tangible. Amina paced slowly, her hands clasped tightly together, glancing occasionally at the clock. She could hear the muffled beeping of machines and distant footsteps echoing through the corridors, and each sound reminded her of what was at stake. Her father's life was literally on the line. After a few minutes, Lola walked into the hallway. She kept her head down, moving quietly, her face pale and eyes filled with shame. The confidence she usually carried was gone, replaced by guilt that weighed heavily on her. She had never imagined that taking the surgery money could lead to something so serious, so real. Seeing her sister standing there, exhausted but composed, made Lola feel a mixture of awe and regret. For the first time in years, the sisters didn't speak in sarcasm or half-truths. Amina finally turned to Lola, her voice calm but firm. "You need to understand what responsibility means, Lola," she said softly. "Sacrifice isn't just about words. It's about actions. You took something that could have cost Dad his life." Lola swallowed hard, nodding. "I know. I see that now. I'm so sorry, Amina. I was selfish. I didn't think about anyone but myself." Amina's eyes softened, though she didn't smile. "It's not too late to learn. What matters now is Dad." For several quiet moments, the two sisters simply stood there, letting the weight of their conversation settle. No more arguing, no more blame, just honesty. They talked about what it meant to carry responsibility, to sacrifice for someone you love, and the importance of trust within a family. Then the nurses appeared, signaling that it was time. Amina held her father's hand for a brief moment before letting him go, her heart pounding but her mind clear. Lola stood beside her, silently promising to change. As the operating room doors closed, both sisters realized something important. The pain, the mistakes, and the betrayal had brought them to this moment, not just for Dad's survival but for a chance to rebuild the bond between them. That day, beyond the fear and tension, a small spark of hope for their family flickered to life. Months later, Amina walked slowly along the sunlit beaches of Mombasa, her father by her side. Chinidu's steps were steadier now, his breathing easier, and his laughter had returned in small, warm bursts. Each wave that crashed against the shore seemed to wash away a little of the fear and pain they had carried for so long. The surgery had saved his life, but the journey that followed had done more than heal his body. It had begun to mend the cracks in their family. Amina glanced at Lola, who was walking a few steps behind them, quieter than usual, carrying a mixture of guilt and a newfound respect for her sister. The betrayal that had once felt unbearable now seemed like a turning point. It had almost destroyed their family, but it had also shown them what truly mattered: love, responsibility, and trust. For the first time, all three of them were starting to understand that family isn't just about living under the same roof. It's about supporting one another, even when mistakes are made. As they walked, Amina reflected on everything she had endured over the past months. The long hospital shifts, the frantic searches for money, the sleepless nights, and the heartbreak of seeing her father's life at risk. But she also thought about the lessons she had learned. The most important healing, she realized, doesn't always happen in a hospital or with medicine. Sometimes it happens in quiet moments, through forgiveness, honesty, and the effort to rebuild broken trust. Looking at her father smiling in the golden Mombasa sunlight, and her sister walking beside them with a humbler heart, Amina felt a deep sense of peace. Their family was far from perfect, and the scars of betrayal would always remain, but the love that endured had become stronger. And for the first time in a long time she believed they could move forward, together.